There are three pillars that support the temple of my morning sanity. A cup of coffee so strong it could dissolve steel, a shower hot enough to be classified as a low-grade thermal event, and a solid 10 minutes of scrolling through news about things that are on fire somewhere else in the world, just to feel comparatively put together. It's a simple, sacred ritual, a covenant I've made with the universe to ensure I remain a semi-productive member of society. This particular Tuesday, the universe decided to breach the contract. It started at the coffee machine. My Keurig, a machine I have a complex love-hate relationship with, usually greets the day with a series of reassuring gurgles and clicks before dispensing the magical bean juice. Today I pressed the button and was met with a sad, guttural choking sound, a noise like a drowning robot. The add water light blinked at me, an accusation. "Don't you lie to me," I muttered, tapping its plastic shell. "I filled you last night." I pulled out the reservoir. It was, as suspected, nearly full. I shoved it back in, slapped the side for good measure, the universal fix for any piece of technology, and tried again. The same pathetic choke, the same blinking light of betrayal. Fine, I'd go old school. The kettle. I placed it under the faucet and turned the handle. Nothing. Not a drip, not a hiss. Not a single, solitary drop of water emerged from the spout. Just a puff of dry, metallic-smelling air. A profound, unnerving silence settled in the kitchen, a quiet so deep you could hear the dust motes having an existential crisis. My brain, still operating on pre-caffeine dial-up speeds, struggled to process this. Did I forget to pay the water bill? Impossible. It's on autopay, the world's most reliable system for slowly bleeding your bank account dry in exchange for modern conveniences. Did a pipe burst? My mind immediately conjured images of my crawl space transforming into a murky, subterranean water park, a fantasy that would surely be accompanied by the sound of my savings account screaming. But the house was silent, eerily so. I tried the bathroom sink. Same story. The shower? A ghostly whisper of air from the showerhead. I stood in the tiled stall, a grown man in his late 30s, utterly flummoxed by the absence of a resource I hadn't consciously thought about in a decade. You don't realize how much ambient noise water makes in a house. The gentle hum in the pipes, the periodic gurgle of a toilet refilling, until it's gone. The silence was the sound of civilization grinding to a halt. A peek out the window confirmed my growing dread. My neighbor, Tim, a man whose lawn was his life's work, was staring at his sprinkler heads with the same baffled expression a dog has when you pretend to throw the ball. Across the street, Carol Ann was whacking the side of her house with a broom, as if she could physically intimidate the plumbing into submission. Then, my phone buzzed. A text from my wife, Sarah, already at her office downtown. "Is the water out? The neighborhood group chat is blowing up." So it wasn't just me, it was all of us. The entire Whispering Pines subdivision, a name that promised serene tranquility but mostly delivered passive-aggressive notes about lawn maintenance, was now an officially designated drought zone. And that's when a cold, dark certainty settled in my gut. In this neighborhood, chaos doesn't just happen. It isn't random. It's usually scheduled, laminated, and distributed via a condescendingly cheerful email. It usually has a name, and that name is Karen. I had a very, very bad feeling that our self-appointed queen of the ownership association, a woman who once tried to fine me because my recycling bin was aesthetically displeasing to the community palate, was somehow behind this. In Whispering Pines, you learn to recognize the signs. And the deafening silence of my faucets was screaming her name, just as the thought solidified, My phone buzzed again. Not a text this time, an email. The subject line, in bold, ominous letters, read, "Important Community Update, Water Tower Maintenance." "Here we go," I said to my dog, Buster, who was looking at his empty water bowl with an expression of deep philosophical betrayal. I opened the email. It was from the official Whispering Pines OA account, but the prose had Karen's linguistic fingerprints all over it. A unique blend of corporate buzzwords, saccharine platitudes, and the thinly veiled threat of a monarch addressing her serfs. I read it aloud to Buster, my voice dripping with the sarcasm it deserved. "Dear valued residents." Translation: Listen up, peasants. As part of our ongoing commitment to community excellence and proactive infrastructure management. Translation: I had a dumb idea over my Chardonnay last night and ran with it. The Whispering Pines Community Water Tower has been temporarily drained to facilitate an essential and exciting new beautification project. I stopped. I read that line again. Drained, on purpose, to facilitate a beautification project. My blood, which had been sluggishly awaiting its morning caffeine, began to simmer. The email went on to explain, in excruciating detail, that the draining was absolutely necessary to ensure a pristine canvas for a local artist, probably Karen's nephew, who got a CO in high school art, to paint a community-unifying mural. There was no mention of what this mural would depict, but I immediately pictured a poorly rendered squirrel holding a "Live, Laugh, Love" sign, or perhaps just a 10-foot-tall portrait of Karen's smiling, smug face. The most infuriating part was the timeline, or rather, the complete lack of one. The water, the email explained, would be turned back on as soon as the project is completed and the tower can be safely refilled and sanitized, a process which, as you can appreciate, cannot be rushed. Cannot be rushed? I was living in a dusty, uncaffeinated tinderbox in the middle of a June heat wave, and she was worried about rushing the paint job on a giant metal ball nobody looks at. The email concluded with a final, breathtakingly tone-deaf sign-off that pushed me over the edge. Let's all embrace this short-term inconvenience for a long-term aesthetic gain. Stay hydrated with bottled water, of course, and have a wonderful day. Sincerely, your Whispering Pines OA board. I stared at my phone screen, my thumb hovering over the delete button as if purging it would somehow bring the water back. The rage that filled me was pure and potent. It was the specific, crystalline fury reserved for people who wield tiny amounts of power like a battle axe, the kind of anger that comes from being subjected to monumental incompetence masquerading as authoritative action. I pay $400 a quarter in OA fees for this. For a woman to unilaterally decide to turn off the water for nearly 2,000 people so she could indulge a whim. I imagined her in her beige-on-beige house, perfectly air-conditioned, sipping an imported Pellegrino, feeling incredibly proud of her proactive infrastructure management. I stood there in my silent, stuffy house, a prisoner of Karen's artistic vision. No shower, no coffee, no flushing toilets, the basic dignities of modern life gone. The social contract of suburbia, we'll tolerate your lawn gnomes if you tolerate our basketball hoop, had been fundamentally breached. All bets were off. I looked at Buster, who had resorted to licking the condensation off the kitchen floor. "Okay," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Fine. War it is." For a solid 10 minutes, I paced my living room, fueled by a cocktail of spite and dehydration. My initial thoughts were of petty, unsatisfying revenge, flaming bags of, too much effort, and a potential felony. Signing Karen up for every political and religious newsletter in existence? Too subtle. The payoff was too far down the road. I needed something immediate. Something big. something that solved my practical problem while simultaneously serving as a loud, theatrical, and utterly undeniable countermove to her tyranny. I needed a statement piece, a statement written in thousands upon thousands of gallons of glorious, life-giving water. My eyes scanned my home office, a room that had become a dumping ground for the ghosts of projects past. And then it hit me. A memory surfaced from the graveyard of my failed business ventures. About 5 years ago, a friend and I had a brilliant, alcohol-fueled idea to launch an outdoor indie music festival. The venture crashed and burned with the financial grace of the Hindenburg, but not before I had spent months sourcing logistics for a remote, off-grid location. I remembered a binder, a thick, 3-ring binder filled with the business cards of vendors for everything from industrial-grade porta-potties to massive diesel generators. And yes, bulk water transport. I tore the office apart like a man possessed, creating a tornado of old invoices and tax documents. Buster watched from the doorway, tilting his head as if concerned for my sanity. Finally, under a stack of defunct graphic design magazines, I found it. A thick blue binder labeled Festival Logistics. I blew a plume of dust off the cover and flipped it open. I thumbed past Bob's Porta Potty Palace and Gus's Generators, We Bring the Juice. And there, nestled between a card for pyrotechnics and one for organic goat milk ice cream, was a simple, no-nonsense business card. White cardstock, blue block letters. Sully's Bulk Liquid Transport. You got a thirst, we got the truck. Call Sully. The idea that bloomed in my mind was insane. Utterly, certifiably, lose your security deposit. Insane. I pictured a colossal tanker truck, the kind you see barreling down the interstate, trying to navigate the pristine, winding streets and tight cul-de-sacs of whispering pines. I imagined the rumble of its engine, the hiss of its air brakes, the sheer, beautiful chaos of its presence. It was perfect. It was a practical solution to the immediate problem, no water, and a direct, theatrical rebuttal to Karen's authority, a 40-ton middle finger parked in front of her prize-winning petunias. I began pacing again, this time with a new energy, having a full-blown conversation with myself. Sensible Jack. This is crazy. You can't just park an 18-wheeler in the middle of a residential street. There are rules, bylaws. Section 12, subsection C, for God's sake. Spiteful Jack. Karen shattered the rules when she turned off the water for a craft project. This isn't anarchy, it's disaster relief. We're a humanitarian mission. Sensible Jack. It's going to cost a fortune, a ridiculous, indefensible fortune. Spiteful Jack. Think of it as an investment in high-concept performance art. And besides, I'm not paying for it. The OA is. I'll just send them the bill. Sensible Jack. Karen is going to have a full-blown blood vessel-bursting aneurysm right there on her manicured lawn. Spiteful Jack. And the downside is? The debate was over. Spiteful Jack had won by a technical knockout. I grabbed my phone, my heart pounding with a mixture of pure terror and giddy exhilaration. My hands were shaking, but my purpose was firm. I was actually going to do this. I was going to call Sully. I walked to my front window and looked out at my sad, brown, thirsty lawn. I looked towards Karen's house, a beige fortress of tyranny 2 doors down. Hold on, little buddy, I whispered to a particularly pathetic-looking patch of crabgrass. Reinforcements are coming. My finger hovered over the call button on Sully's contact number for a solid 30 seconds. This was the point of no return. Once this call was made, the dominoes would start to fall, likely onto my own head. I took a deep breath, channeling the righteous indignation of a man denied his morning coffee, and pressed the screen. The phone was answered on the second ring with a gravelly, booming voice that sounded like it ran on diesel. Sully's. Hi, is this Sully? I asked, trying to sound casual, like ordering a tanker truck full of water was a regular part of my Tuesday morning. Last I checked, the voice rumbled. What liquid we talkin'? Need me to empty a pool, fill a pond, got a weird baptism you're plannin'? It's water, I said, my voice cracking slightly. I cleared my throat. I need water, a lot of it. I live in a suburban neighborhood and our water tower is out of commission. Out of commission? Sully repeated, a note of professional interest in his voice. You mean like a main broke? Pump failure? Here was the moment of truth. I couldn't lie. The sheer weirdness of the situation was my only real currency. No, not exactly, I said, taking the plunge. It was drained. On purpose. By our ownership association president, so she can have a mural painted on it. The line went dead silent. For a horrible second, I thought he'd hung up on me, dismissing me as a prank caller. I was about to speak again when a low chuckle came through the receiver. It started deep in his chest and slowly built, wave after wave, into a full-throated, booming, infectious laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had just heard the single greatest thing in his long, storied career. She what? He finally roared, still chuckling. Buddy, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've hauled potable water to rock festivals in the middle of nowhere. I've hauled it to movie sets in the Mojave Desert. I once delivered 10,000 gallons of spring water to a millionaire in Beverly Hills so his dogs could have their own private water park. But I have never, ever been asked to solve a problem caused by a lady with a paintbrush and a god complex. I love it. You're my new favorite person. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I had an ally, a very large ally with a very large truck. All right, Jack, my new favorite customer, Sully said, all business now that the initial shock had worn off. How much you need? My biggest girl is a 50,000-gallon stainless steel tanker. All potable, of course, filtered better than that fancy stuff you buy in little plastic bottles. 50,000 gallons. The number was abstract, immense. I tried to picture it. It was probably more water than I had used in my entire life. 50,000? I stammered, trying to do the math. I guess that's a lot? Is that a lot? For a neighborhood of, what, a couple hundred houses? Sully explained. It'll keep your toilets flushing and your coffee makers brewing for a day or two, easy. Plus, it's a beautiful sight, my friend. A real statement piece. Nothing says, I disagree with current management, like 80 feet of polished chrome parked on the curb. He had a point. I'll take it, I said, a newfound confidence in my voice. Sully quoted me a price. It was a number that made my stomach clench. It was more than my first car. I swallowed hard, picturing Karen's face when she saw the invoice. The image fortified my resolve. The ownership association will be covering it, I declared, as if it were a settled fact. That's the spirit, Sully chuckled. I gave him the address for Whispering Pines, carefully explaining the narrow, winding streets and the speed bumps designed to foil DoorDash drivers. I also gave him a brief character sketch of the local dragon he was likely to encounter. Sully was not fazed. Don't you worry about Karen, he said with absolute confidence. My truck's bigger than her attitude, I guarantee it. I'm finishing a job in the city now. I can be there in, let's see, 90 minutes. 90 minutes? Seriously? Son, when a man calls me with a story that good, I move him to the front of the line. See you soon. He hung up. I stood in the middle of my living room, phone in hand, my body thrumming with a wild energy. It was done. A 50,000-gallon, 40-ton, 80-foot-long solution was currently barreling down the highway toward my quiet little cul-de-sac. A wave of panic washed over me. What have I done? I thought, my sensible side making one last desperate stand. I walked to the window, looked towards Karen's house, and a slow, triumphant grin spread across my face. Spiteful Jack was back in control. Exactly what I needed to do. The next 90 minutes were the longest and most excruciating of my life. It was like waiting for a bomb to go off. Except I was the one who had lit the fuse. I couldn't sit still. I paced the house, a caged animal waiting for his salvation. Or his doom. I decided to give a few of my more reasonable neighbors a heads up. I started a group text with Tim from next door, Dave from across the street, and a few others I was on friendly terms with. I kept it cryptic. Water situation update. I have a solution coming. It's big and loud. Stay tuned and maybe move your cars off the street. The replies came instantly. A cascade of question marks and confused emojis. Tim. What kind of solution? Did you fix the main? Dave. Big, like a work crew? I just replied with a smiley face emoji wearing sunglasses. Let them wonder. The theatricality was part of the package. Then I heard it. It started as a low, deep vibration that I felt more than heard, a thrum that was completely alien to the suburban soundscape of electric leaf blowers and yapping Pomeranians. The rumble grew steadily louder, resonating through the floorboards, rattling the pictures on my walls. It was accompanied by the periodic, powerful hiss of air brakes, a sound that promised immense weight and industrial power. Buster started barking, a low, guttural woof of alarm. It's okay, boy, I said, my voice tight with anticipation as I peered out the front window. The cavalry's here. And there it was. It appeared at the end of the street, a vision of polished chrome and raw power that was so out of place it felt like a hallucination. The tanker truck was a gleaming silver behemoth, a land whale navigating a goldfish pond. It moved with an impossible, lumbering grace, its massive grille seeming to swallow the road. It blocked out the sun. The pristine, HOA-approved crepe myrtles lining the sidewalks looked like bonsai trees next to its enormous tires. High up in the cab, a tiny figure in a baseball cap gave me a cheerful thumbs up. It was Sully. The neighborhood came to a collective standstill. Screen doors creaked open. Faces appeared in windows, their expressions a perfect blend of awe, confusion, and dawning comprehension. My phone buzzed uncontrollably in my pocket as the group text exploded. OMG, Jack, what is that? And then, as if summoned by the disturbance in the suburban force, Karen appeared. She didn't walk. She power-walked, her arms pumping, her pink visor a beacon of impending conflict. She marched from her house with the righteous fury of a prophet come to smite the wicked. Her perpetually silent husband, Gary, trailed a few paces behind her, a beige shadow of a man. She had her phone out, already filming for evidence. The truck let out one final, deafening hiss of its air brakes, parking directly in front of my house, and more importantly, directly in the line of sight of Karen's front window. The engine idled with a deep, satisfying rumble. The show was about to begin. Jack! Karen shrieked, her voice barely carrying over the thrum of the engine. What is the meaning of this? You cannot park this thing here. It is a clear violation of Section 12, subsection C, regarding unauthorized commercial vehicles. I strolled out onto my lawn, feeling unnaturally calm. I was a man with a 50,000-gallon ace up his sleeve. Good morning, Karen, I shouted back cheerfully. Beautiful day for a mural, isn't it? This isn't parked, it's making a delivery. Of water. You know, the stuff that's supposed to come out of the pipes? The wet stuff? Sully, enjoying the drama, leaned his arm out of his window, a broad grin on his face. "Ma'am," he yelled, "just need to know where you want the 50,000 gallons of premium H2O?" Karen sputtered, momentarily speechless at being addressed directly by the help. She looked from the truck to me, her face turning a shade of crimson that clashed horribly with her visor. You will leave immediately. I am the president of the ownership association. I command you to leave." Sully cupped his ear theatrically. "Sorry, can't hear you over the sound of all this impending hydration. Jack, you the designated water boss? Just point where you want the spigot." This was the moment the tide turned. Neighbors started to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion. They kept a safe distance, but they were close enough to watch the show. Emboldened by my defiance, a few of them started to voice their support. "He's right, Karen. We need water," shouted Tim. "My toilet won't flush," yelled someone from down the street. "Go, Jack." Karen looked around wildly, her authority evaporating in the humid air. She was used to winning arguments in the sterile, controlled environment of the clubhouse, not in a public forum with a 40-ton truck as a debate prop. She looked cornered, her power rendered useless against the sheer, overwhelming reality of the tanker. She did the only thing she could think of. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "I am calling the police!" she screeched, spinning on her heel and storming back toward her beige fortress. I just smiled. "Please do," I thought to myself, leaning casually against the warm, solid metal of Sully's truck. This is just getting good. 10 minutes later, a squad car rolled quietly down the street. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, just the resigned posture of a vehicle heading toward a problem it already knew was going to be monumentally stupid. Out stepped 2 officers. The driver was older, with a magnificent gray mustache and a weary look in his eyes that suggested he was just a few HOA disputes away from retirement. This was Officer Miller. His partner was younger, crisper, and had the earnest face of someone who still believed he could make a difference. He was also visibly struggling to keep a straight face. This was Officer Davies. Karen intercepted them on the sidewalk before they could even take 2 steps, launching into a frantic, high-pitched tirade. She gestured wildly at the tanker, then at me, then at the growing crowd of neighbors who were now brazenly spectating from their lawns, some with camping chairs. "Thank goodness you're here, officers," she began, her voice quivering with performative distress. "This man," she pointed at me, "has brought this industrial monstrosity into our residential community. It's a violation of bylaws, it's lowering property values, it's an unregistered commercial vehicle, and it's a threat to the peace and safety of Whispering Pines." Officer Miller listened with a practiced, patient nod, his eyes glazed over with the 1,000-yard stare of a man who had heard it all before. Officer Davies, meanwhile, was looking past Karen at the massive tanker with an expression of what I could only describe as genuine awe. I stayed put, leaning against the warm metal of my beautiful, watery war machine, projecting an aura of what I hoped was unassailable reasonableness. Finally, Miller held up a hand, expertly silencing Karen mid-squawk. He ambled over to me, his movements slow and deliberate. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a low, tired drawl. "So, what's all this then?" "Afternoon, officer," I replied respectfully. "This is a temporary emergency water supply for the neighborhood." Miller's mustache twitched. "Ran out of bottled water at the Costco, did we?" "Something like that," I said. "Our OA president had the community water tower drained this morning to have a mural painted on it. Left about 2,000 of us high and dry in a heat wave." Miller and Davies exchanged a look. It was a brief, subtle glance, but it spoke volumes. It was the universal look of civil servants everywhere that said, "Oh, it's one of these calls." Miller turned his head slowly toward Karen, who was hovering nearby, ready to interject. "Ma'am," he asked, his tone dangerously neutral. "Did you, or the association you represent, authorize the draining of the municipal water supply for this entire development?" "It's not a municipal supply," Karen snapped, suddenly defensive. "It is the private property of the Whispering Pines Ownership Association, and we are performing essential, pre-approved maintenance." Miller absorbed this information without changing his expression. He turned back to me. "And this truck, is it leaking any hazardous materials? Is it blocking emergency access like a fire lane?" "Nope," I said, patting the tanker's cool steel shell. "Clean as a whistle. Holds 50,000 gallons of perfectly potable water. And as you can see, your squad car got through just fine. It's just big." Officer Miller let out a long, slow sigh. It was the sound of a man whose will to live was being steadily eroded by suburban drama. "Folks," he said, projecting his voice just enough for the assembled neighbors to hear. "As far as I can see, there's no law being broken here. A vehicle is making a delivery. It's not a criminal matter. It's an OA matter. A very, very silly OA matter." He looked directly at Karen, his eyes suddenly sharp. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you focus your energy on getting the main water tower refilled. That seems like the actual problem here. Have a nice day." He and Davies turned and walked back to their car. As Davies got in, he turned his head away from Karen to hide what was unmistakably a broad grin. The squad car started, pulled a smooth U-turn, and drove away, leaving a thick, heavy silence in its wake. The silence was broken by a smattering of applause from the assembled neighbors, which quickly grew into a small but defiant cheer. Karen was left standing alone on the curb, sputtering, her face a mask of pure disbelief. Her ultimate weapon, calling the authorities, had not only failed, it had backfired spectacularly. She had been publicly dismissed. I gave my audience a little bow. The balance of power in Whispering Pines had officially and irrevocably shifted. I was a hero, a conquering king. I was also a man with a 50,000-gallon tank of water and absolutely no way to get it to the people. I couldn't have 200 households lining up with buckets and Tupperware containers like some scene out of a post-apocalyptic movie. This operation needed to be elegant. It needed finesse. It needed a distribution system. I needed professionals. Or, at least, guys who owned a lot of tools and had a flexible interpretation of the word professional. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't used since my kitchen remodel went 6 weeks over schedule, but ended up looking fantastic. I dialed the number from Manny's handyman services. The phone was answered on the first ring with a blast of mariachi music and a cheerful, heavily accented voice. "Manny's, you break it. We make it better." "Manny, it's Jack," I said, "from the Whispering Pines job. I've got a situation." "Jackie boy, my favorite customer. What is it? Your garbage disposal making that noise again? Did you try to shove a whole chicken down there like I told you not to?" "Worse, Manny. There's no water in the whole neighborhood, but—" I paused for dramatic effect. "I have a 50,000-gallon water tanker parked in front of my house." The mariachi music was abruptly silenced. "My friend," Manny said, his voice a whisper of awe. "Let me get this straight. You have a giant truck of water and you need to plug it into your neighborhood? Like you want to be the water company?" "Essentially, yes. But for like a day, can you do it?" A joyful whoop erupted from the other end of the line. "Hoo, that's a spicy meatball, I love it! Jackie, my friend, for you anything. We can do this. I'll bring Pip, he's a wizard with pumps and all the new computer stuff, and I'll get Frank." My heart sank a little. "No fingers, Frank? Are you sure that's wise, Manny? We're dealing with high-pressure water here. He's the best with high-pressure hoses. The best! The nickname is from an unrelated incident involving a badger and some faulty wiring, mostly. Don't worry about it. We'll be there in 30 minutes. He hung up, leaving me to ponder the series of life choices that had led me to this moment. True to his word, exactly 28 minutes later, a beat-up work van that was more Bondo than original paint screeched to a halt behind Sully's gleaming tanker. The side door flew open, and out piled my salvation. First was Manny, a short, stocky man who was a bundle of pure, undiluted kinetic energy. He was followed by Pip, a lanky kid no older than 22 who was already looking up municipal water main schematics on a cracked tablet, and last, out lumbered Frank. A large, silent man with a grizzled beard, he nodded once at me, then immediately began assessing the tanker's various valves with the critical eye of a master craftsman. The four of them, me, the bewildered suburbanite, Sully, the amused logistics king, Manny, the hyperactive foreman, and Pip, the tech guru, with Frank providing occasional deeply meaningful grunts of approval or disapproval, huddled together in a council of war. They spread a rough schematic of the neighborhood's water main access points, which Pip had, of course, found on a county website in 30 seconds, on the dusty hood of Manny's van. What they devised was a work of insane, beautiful, redneck engineering. "Okay," Manny began, pointing with a greasy finger. "Sully's truck has a mother of a pump. We use that. We run a 4-inch main hose from the tanker to this." He theatrically produced a complex-looking device of pipes and valves from the back of his van. "My custom-built octo manifold," Pip chimed in, not looking up from his tablet. "We can use the manifold to split the main line into 3 smaller 2-inch lines. We run those hoses to the 3 fire hydrants on this loop. One here, one by the pool, and one at the end of the cul-de-sac." My jaw dropped. "You're going to open the fire hydrants?" Frank grunted and produced a wrench from a loop on his belt. It was the size of a medieval battle axe. "We will gently convince them to open," Manny corrected. "Then we reverse the flow. We push the water from the truck back into the hydrants, pressurizing the local pipe system from the outside in. If Pip gets the pressure right, every house on this block will have running water." It was the most audacious and brilliant plan I had ever heard. The scene that followed was a montage of glorious, organized chaos. Manny and his crew unspooled massive, heavy hoses, shouting to each other in a rapid-fire mix of English and Spanish. Pip was tapping at his tablet, muttering about fluid dynamics and PSI levels. Frank, with a grunt of immense effort, cracked open the hydrant caps one by one. Sully oversaw the entire operation from his driver's seat like a benevolent king on his throne, occasionally shouting encouragement. Neighbors, drawn by the spectacle, started to offer help. They brought out cold drinks, sandwiches, and bags of chips. What had started as a one-man protest had morphed into a bizarre, impromptu block party, a festival of defiance. Through it all, I could see the curtains twitching in Karen's window, a silent, furious observer of the revolution happening on her doorstep. The sun was high in the sky, beating down on the asphalt. The air was thick with the smell of diesel, sweat, and cheap beer from the neighbors. But mostly, it was thick with anticipation. The system was in place. Hoses, like giant, multicolored anacondas, snaked across pristine lawns and driveways, all converging on Manny's gleaming octo-manifold. The entire neighborhood, it seemed, was gathered at a safe distance, a silent, hopeful audience for our grand finale. Phones were out, recording. The stage was set. Manny stood by the manifold, wiping his brow with the back of a greasy hand. He'd taken on the role of orchestra conductor, giving hand signals to Pip, who was by the central hydrant with his tablet, and Sully, who had his hand on the tanker's main pump control. Frank stood beside the tanker, his arms crossed, his massive wrench resting on his shoulder. He gave a final, solemn thumbs up. It was time. "Okay, Jackie boy," Manny yelled, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. "Are you ready to make it rain?" A cheer went up from the assembled crowd. I was standing in the middle of it all, a ridiculous, giddy grin plastered on my face. I felt like a general about to lead his troops into a very strange, very well-hydrated battle. "I was born ready, Manny," I shouted back, laughing. "All right," Manny yelled, pointing a dramatic finger at Sully. "Hit it, big guy. Give us 20 psi to start, nice and easy." Sully gave a crisp salute and engaged the pump. A low thrum vibrated through the ground as the powerful machine kicked into gear. The massive hoses twitched, then stiffened as 50,000 gallons of water began its journey. A deep groaning sound came from the pipes underground, the sound of an old system being woken up in a very unconventional way. For a long, agonizing second, nothing happened. My heart sank. Did we miscalculate? Did we blow a seal? Was I about to be responsible for rupturing the entire neighborhood's plumbing system, turning my act of defiance into an act of catastrophic vandalism? I saw Karen's face in my mind, a triumphant smirk replacing her usual scowl. Then, a cheer erupted from a house down the street. It was Tim. He was standing on his front porch, holding up a garden hose that was spraying a beautiful, powerful arc of water triumphantly into the air. Another cheer went up from the other direction. Carol Ann's sprinkler system, the one she'd been staring at mournfully all morning, sputtered to life, casting rainbows in the afternoon sun. Soon, a wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over the neighborhood. We could hear the collective sounds of success, toilets flushing with ceremonial reverence, faucets being turned on, shouts of glee. Kids who had been listlessly slumped on porches suddenly appeared in swimsuits, running and screaming with delight under the newly active sprinklers. It worked. The crazy, impossible, beautiful plan had actually worked. I was standing in the middle of the street, frozen in a state of disbelief, when Tim ran over and gave me a massive, soaking hug. Soon, I was surrounded by laughing, cheering neighbors, all patting me on the back. Someone handed me a cold beer. My motley crew of heroes, Sully, Manny, Pip, and Frank, were being celebrated like conquering heroes, which, in a way, they were. They had done it. We had done it. We had stared into the abyss of Karen-induced drought and spat in its eye. We had brought water back to the people. For a brief, shining moment, standing there soaked to the bone from a celebratory spray from a neighbor's hose, I wasn't just Jack from 24 Whispering Pines Lane anymore. I was Jack, the water bringer, the tanker titan, the reluctant king of the cul-de-sac. I took a deep, satisfying breath. The air smelled of victory, and faintly of chlorinated water. For the rest of that glorious afternoon and into the evening, the water flowed. The mood in Whispering Pines was transformed. The tanker truck, my silver warhorse, became the centerpiece for an impromptu, neighborhood-wide potluck barbecue. Grills were rolled out, coolers appeared, and music played from portable speakers. It felt less like a suburb and more like a music festival, one that had miraculously succeeded where my long-forgotten business venture had failed. Sully was the guest of honor, holding court by his truck, telling incredible stories of his weirdest hauling jobs to a rapt audience of dads in cargo shorts. Manny and his crew were treated like visiting dignitaries, showered with praise and plates piled high with burgers and potato salad. Frank even cracked a smile, a monumental event that several people claimed to have captured on video. And I, your humble narrator, was toasted, celebrated, and forced to recount the story of the phone call no less than a dozen times. For the first time, I felt a genuine sense of community. born from a shared crisis and a ridiculously oversized solution. But as the sun set and the party wound down, the cold, hard reality of my actions began to set in. The next morning, it arrived in my inbox in the form of 2 emails. One was a PDF invoice from Sully's bulk liquid transport. The other was from Manny's handyman services, with the subject line, "For making the wet happen." I opened them, my hand trembling slightly. The grand total was a number with a comma in it. A big comma. It was an eye-watering, stomach-lurching figure that made my triumphant defiance feel suddenly very, very expensive. But then I pictured Karen's face, and I knew what I had to do. With the invoices printed out and a newfound sense of righteous purpose, I marched down the street to Karen's house. The prize-winning petunias in her flower bed seemed to sneer at me. This was it, the final showdown. I rang the doorbell. After a long moment, the door opened a crack. Karen peered out, looking haggard and defeated. Her hair wasn't perfectly coiffed. Her visor was gone. "Morning, Karen," I said, my voice dripping with cheerful pleasantness. "Hope you slept well. I just wanted to drop this off for the OA's accounting department." I held out the printed invoices. She stared at them, then at my face, then back at the papers. She slowly took them from my hand. I watched her eyes scan the pages, then widen as they landed on the final totals. Her face, already pale, lost all its color. You cannot be serious," she whispered, her voice a hoarse croak. "The association will absolutely not be paying for your stunt." "It wasn't a stunt, Karen," I replied, my smile never wavering. "It was emergency infrastructure management. I believe that's the phrase you used in your email. You created a problem by draining the water tower for your, what was it again? A community unifying beautification project? I simply provided the solution. The residents are happy. The water is flowing. This seems pretty straightforward to me." "This is extortion," she hissed, finding her voice again. "It's illegal." "Is it?" I countered, raising an eyebrow. "Or is it more illegal to knowingly and willfully deprive an entire community of a basic utility without a proper plan or timeline? I'm sure a judge would find this whole situation fascinating, or maybe the local news. I bet they'd love a story about an HOA that valued a mural over running water for its residents." I casually gestured to the street. As if on cue, several of my neighbors had conveniently stopped their morning walks to watch the exchange. Tim gave me a subtle thumbs up. Carol Ann smiled sweetly. Karen followed my gaze and saw them. She saw the faces of her former subjects, now united against her. She saw their unwavering support for me. Her authority, already cracked, shattered completely. It was gone, replaced by public ridicule. She snatched the papers from my hand, her knuckles white. "There will be an emergency board meeting tonight," she hissed, her eyes burning with a desperate, futile rage. 7 o'clock at the clubhouse. We'll see who's right." She slammed the door in my face. I walked away, not worried at all. I was actually looking forward to the meeting. I had a pretty good idea of exactly how it was going to go. The community clubhouse, a place usually reserved for bunco nights and uninspired holiday parties, was buzzing with an electric energy I'd never felt before. It was standing room only. Every seat was filled, and residents lined the walls, their faces a mixture of grim determination and giddy anticipation. It felt less like an OA meeting and more like a public tribunal. At a folding table at the front sat the board. Karen, looking grim and defiant, her 2 loyal sycophants, Brenda and Eileen, who looked deeply uncomfortable, and her husband, Gary, who just sat there, silent and still as a garden gnome. Karen banged a small gavel on the table, the sound barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. This emergency meeting of the Whispering Pines Ownership Association is now in session, she announced, her voice tight. She launched immediately into her attack, attempting to frame me as a dangerous rogue agent. As you all know, she began, our community recently faced a temporary interruption in our water service during a planned maintenance period. One resident, Mr. Jack Turner, took it upon himself to engage in an unauthorized, unvetted, and frankly vulgar display of vigilantism. She held up my invoices, waving them like a weapon. He brought an industrial vehicle into our neighborhood, endangering our children and our property values, and now has the audacity to present the association with this outrageous bill. She paused, clearly expecting murmurs of agreement. Instead, she was met with dead silence. Before she could continue her tirade, Tim stood up from the front row. "He got us water, Karen," he said, his voice ringing with clarity. "You're the one who left us high and dry for a painting." A woman in the back shouted, "My kids couldn't even take a bath. I had to wash my toddler's hair with a bottle of Evian. What Jack did was heroic." Suddenly, the floodgates opened. One by one, residents stood up to speak, not with anger, but with a firm, unified voice. They didn't just defend me, they praised me. They talked about my quick thinking. They talked about the incredible sense of community they had felt during the Great Thirst, as it was now being called. They talked about the barbecue, about neighbors helping neighbors, about the triumph of common sense over bureaucracy. Karen's face went from grim to ashen as she listened to her power being systematically dismantled, testimony by testimony. Finally, a quiet, older woman named Mrs. Gable, who had lived in Whispering Pines since it was built 30 years ago, slowly stood up. The room fell silent. Everyone respected Mrs. Gable. "Karen," she said, her voice shaking slightly, but filled with an unshakable resolve. "I have lived here a long time. I have seen a lot of presidents come and go, but I believe you have truly lost the plot. Your actions were reckless and inconsiderate. Therefore, I move for a vote of no confidence in your leadership as president of this association." A gasp went through the room, followed by an immediate, booming voice from the back. "I second that motion." The clubhouse erupted into chaotic but decisive action. A vote was called for. It wasn't even close. A forest of hands went up in favor of removing Karen. When the call came for those opposed, only 2 hands were raised, Brenda and Eileen. Karen was voted out in a landslide. In the ensuing pandemonium, Brenda and Eileen hastily resigned from the board. Amid the cheering, someone shouted, "I nominate Jack for president!" A chorus of "Ayes" and applause went up. I immediately jumped to my feet, holding my hands up in surrender. "No, whoa, no, absolutely not," I said, laughing. "Thank you, but no, I did not do any of this to get a job. My only platform was a pro-coffee and functioning toilets. Now that we have that, I'm retired from politics." The crowd laughed. "But," I continued, "I would like to nominate someone who actually has the wisdom and temperament for the job. I nominate Mrs. Gable." The clubhouse roared its approval. She was elected by acclamation. Her first official act as the new OA president? To call a vote on paying Sully's and Manny's invoices from the OA's Beautification and Contingency Fund. The motion passed unanimously. Karen, utterly defeated, stood up, grabbed her purse, and stormed out of the clubhouse without another word. Gary silently stood and followed her out, the reign of terror officially over. In the week that followed, a strange and wonderful peace settled over Whispering Pines. The main water tower was refilled, quietly, professionally, and with a full 48 hours of advance notice emailed out by the new OA board. The ill-fated mural project was officially and permanently scrapped. The line item in the budget was relabeled Community Emergency Response Fund. My life returned mostly to normal. but with a few key differences. I had, it seemed, become a local legend. When I walked Buster, people didn't just give the standard polite, tight-lipped suburban nod. They waved. They smiled, genuinely. The guy at the corner, who I was pretty sure didn't even know my name before, now greeted me with a hearty, "Hey, waterman!" My sarcastic observations about neighborhood life, once confined to my own internal monologue or texts with Sarah, were now treated as profound wisdom at neighborhood barbecues. I was the reluctant, respected elder statesman of the cul-de-sac, a folk hero whose legend was already growing with each retelling. I heard one kid telling another that the tanker was actually 1,000,000 gallons, and that I had wrestled Karen for the keys to the water tower. I decided not to correct him. My relationship with my immediate neighbors was forged anew in the fires of our shared crisis. We had a bond now, a shared story that went beyond borrowing a cup of sugar. We were the veterans of the Great Thirst. The story concludes where it began, in my bathroom. I stood under the shower, the water pressure fantastic, the heat just right. I let the hot water run over my head, washing away the last remnants of the stress and chaos. I reflected on the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the past week. I didn't want to be a hero. I didn't want to lead a revolution. I just wanted to make a pot of coffee. But in fighting for my own simple creature comforts, I had accidentally liberated an entire community from the clutches of a petty tyrant. I had brought people together, not with a planned social event or a forced holiday party, but with a shared enemy and a ridiculously oversized solution. Maybe, I mused, that's all community really is. A group of people who, when faced with a common problem, decide to solve it together, sometimes with a 50,000-gallon water tanker and a crew of sketchy but brilliant handymen. I turned off the water, the silence now comforting rather than alarming. I wrapped myself in a towel and looked at my reflection in the steamy mirror. A regular guy, a little older than he'd like to admit, who just wanted to be left alone. So that's what it takes, I thought to myself, a smirk playing on my lips. One angry guy, a 50,000-gallon tanker, and an HOA president who just pushed things a little too far. I let out a laugh, the sound echoing in the wonderfully, beautifully, blessedly not silent house. Maybe I should put that on a business card. Jack Turner, problem solved. The bigger, the better.